Just when you thought Bethesda were getting better, they've then gone and done a bad thing. What's happening?
Scott Tilford, it's horse armor again. Ever since Bethesda tried to do horse armor with the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, they have been trying to do it ever since. This time,
horse armor returned.
literally.
Oh my god.
This comes from a write-up that I was reading on PC Gamer that talks all about the Starfield Creation Kit, which has just been implemented in Starfield, and it essentially works similar to the Creation Club from Fallout 4, where players can now create their own custom missions using the tools within Starfield, and the majority of these can be released for free, but there is a price attached to some, including one that has been created by Bethesda themselves. So this is a bespoke piece of content released by the company, not a fan-made thing, and people are up in the air because, as PC Gamer notes, this one mission, which is a bounty mission, lasts for less than half an hour and is priced at $7, but realistically, because of how the currency works in the game, where you can only buy, currency within a set amount, like 1,000 coins for $10. Essentially, if you don't already have the coins, you're going to be paying $10 to unlock this one mission, which is not very long at all. And people are review bombing the game, Scott Tilford, in response to this, because surprisingly, nobody wants a tiny little mission for $7 when you are selling, again, as PC Gamer notes, a full expansion pass for $35. That is presumably going to be a meaty experience. I think it's just that idea of Bethesda has always tried to push their luck with what they can and can't get away with in the microtransactions space. Obviously, horse armor, but again, charging for mods at one point, and then having the Creation Club where they, in a good way, like PC Gamer again acknowledges, the quote will probably be up, it's cool that players get the chance to monetize the stuff that they make and get something in return for that, but it's always about Bethesda trying to sneak a little bit for themselves.
Yeah, that was like always the sell behind the Creation Club stuff. It's like, hey, you're part of this as well. It's all going to make sense. We're one big thriving community. But as various releases that they've tried to push this into have gone across the last 10 years especially, that's never really been the case. And overcharging for something like this is just a reminder of how skewed it all is in their favor. I have such a bone to pick with Starfield, like considering that I love that game. I still do love it overall. And we had a great time playing it back in September, which you can check out the podcast and the coverage and stuff back then. But the way that it's all been rolled out, I feel like there'll be this whole thing, probably internally, depending on the different wings of Bethesda, trying to agree with each other in regards to when they roll this out and when the patches and fixes were coming for the base game. And that leading to quite a sour taste for fans, because for the people who were there at the beginning, who championed it and played it, to me, we've only been hit with, hey, if you waited a bit longer, you would have had city maps and all these different improvements to the gameplay overall, like performance and fidelity modes and things like that. Basic quality of life stuff that would have helped clearly the launch day version of the game. And then you've got the community creation stuff as well, which is an even bigger slap in the face. The idea that they can try and hang a premium on Bethesda created stuff and then overcharge for it. And the whole thing where you've got to overpay to get enough coins to cash in. I know that's... I was going to say, I know it's become a standard thing in so many transaction models, but it's insulting. It always is, regardless of which game is doing it. And I just, I don't know, like, I want to support Starfield. I want to support Bethesda. I want to believe that they have our best interests in mind. But it's not that hard to remember everything with Fallout 76 and the way that the consumer was treated across that entire period, for at least for the first 2-3 years of its life. And just remember how bad they are at this.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to bring up Fallout 76 myself because that was another game, not to the level of Starfield, because Starfield at least ran pretty well in launch, and Fallout 76 had a lot of bugs and glitches, to put it mildly. That thing was on fire when it first launched, and then you saw Bethesda then not prioritize the microtransactions, but constantly try to push you towards some in-game purchase or to the store or whatever, while the game itself was fundamentally not finished. And I think it feels like we're sort of seeing a bit of a repeat with that here, where it's like there's a lot you can still do to Starfield to optimize it, to get in those features that you mentioned in time for its shattered space DLC drop. And it's always a case, I think, with companies like this where you just see them kind of prioritizing the money. It's like, oh, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get that store in there. Get the store in.
I have to imagine that's the exact way that their management meetings go at this point. But yeah, that whole idea of Starfield being the new tip of the spear for the future of Bethesda, the idea that it is the first thing on Game Pass, the first major release under the Xbox banner, and the first new IP they've had in 20 odd years. You just want it to work a lot smoothly, or more smoother than it has done. It's just a weird thing. I feel like we have to give it another few months before we even know which version of Starfield people are buying into. Like now it's becoming this quasi-live service thing, which I get there's a whole push for that across the industry, but that idea of trying to over-monetize a single-player game is the thing that annoyed a lot of Bethesda fans and general single-player story fans across the last decade, trying to do Creation Club stuff with Skyrim, with Fallout, and then now doing it immediately with Starfield, when you haven't really even proven there's a really solid overall version of that game, when you keep adding base quality of life features to it.
I think it's also important to talk about Starfield's numbers, because while I don't think it's the end of the world for a single player game to drop off in numbers after the first couple of months it's been on sale. Like, this isn't a live service. It's a big game, but it's not something that you're supposed to jump back in every day to do your dailies or what have you. But if we're talking about what will give this game a boost, it's not a mission like this that costs $7. And again, as the write-up notes, there's free content alongside it. It's not like all of this stuff is gated behind a price point. But like, what's going to get you back in? It's going to be those more substantial updates, right? It's going to be the big expansion that's coming. It's going to be the addition of ground vehicles when you land on planets, city maps, overhauls of that nature. And with Bethesda, I think you've always seen this split between what the game is and the ways the developers try to monetize it, like you say. Well, and that's always been a frustrating push and pull. And it just is another one more thing in the long line of things with them, I suppose.
It reeks of how do we monetize the fan base that are showing up right now. Like you said, the numbers got so much smaller. Starfield isn't something that's geared towards daily play necessarily, but you did even have a lot of veteran Bethesda modders saying they were giving up modding the game. It's just the infrastructure wasn't there for it. It did feel unfinished in some key areas, which is what the main additions to the game are trying to rectify. However, the thing is, in the long term, like going forward, I wonder whether all of this stuff is to try and get some palatable version of Starfield, use the Xbox audience as a test bed to do a new version that's going to be multi-platform. Like, we know there are so many Xbox games that are coming across to PlayStation, and Sea of Thieves was recently reported as the #1 selling game on PlayStation. Maybe the version of Starfield that we land on is then the multi-platform one that arrives on PlayStation.
I reckon so. You know, I think Starfield will come to PlayStation at some point if Microsoft's trajectory and what Phil Spencer was saying just this week about multi-platform games is true, and they're going to follow through on it. And yeah, I think once the expansion can be rolled in, once you have these quality of life improvements, once you have this store up and running with all of the tools that modders need to create bespoke missions and do interesting things, maybe then they'll push it out to more players. And to be honest, like, from a core, do I want this game to succeed level, I'm absolutely saying yes. I am like you. I loved my time with Starfield last year, man. I know a lot of people have issues with it that are totally reasonable. I have issues with it as well, but I think it has so much potential, you know, and I think it's in... I do think it's in a better state than something like Cyberpunk was a few years ago, at least in terms of functionality. Starfield wasn't crashing on me every 30 minutes, wasn't locking me out of quests. Though that stuff might have happened to some, but I just felt like the base was a little bit stronger. And, you know, I'm playing through Fallout 4 right now, and there is so much I still think that Bethesda does right that other developers don't. I do think when it comes to creating worlds and creating stories within those worlds, man, it's just a joy to get lost in one of their games. Yeah. While Starfield had a lot of barren space, it also had so many settlements, so many cool little things you could stumble across on different planets that made you, well, at least it made me fall in love with it. So I want to see more of that in the future.
Well, to address that, my overall thing with like the how big the galaxy was, all the negative space, you need that much negative space to convince people that it is a big overall intergalactic mission. So then you find something that it feels like only you found. That's what No Man's Sky did so well. But yeah, overall, Starfield is a recommendable experience, which is why it's annoying because of the way that it's been rolled out. They took took forever putting the thing out. It's 20 years since their last new IP. And to get to the state now where it's all being drip fed and there's various updates that have also been staggered. There was an update a couple of weeks ago. The ground vehicle stuff is still to come.
Yeah.
Settlement variation is still a big deal. Most of the side missions you go on will end up in the same location once you go inside a planet. There are still things that reek of like an early access version of this game. And then you're going in there and changing the guts of it to try and monetize different things, add plug-in missions, encourage the community to help them out. Like even before Starfield came out, Todd Howard was out there saying we're using the same game engine because that's what the modders love. And there's just a little bit too much of a reliance on everyone else doing your job for you at this point. That does rub me up the wrong way when I'm investing time in a product that has been released and assumedly is worth my time at launch.
100%. I mean, Scott, you were talking to the guy who has Game Pass and still bought the super, paid an extra 35 quid so I could get access to the game early and also got the expansion as well. So I'm like all in on this, and I am someone who has the feeling that they similarly kind of paid for an early access version of Starfield. Like I said, I think it's much better than something like Cyberpunk was at the start, but I would have loved to have played it fresh with all of the content that's come out since and all the content that's coming out at the end of the year. And at a certain point, I think you've just got to ask the question, and I'll throw it down to you in the comments, like, how many times can a developer or a publisher or a studio get away with treating their most passionate fans and the day one buyers like the worst? Because you get the worst version of the game and then you're monetized because you're the people who hang around when everyone else drops off. And it just sucks. It's the way it's always been, but it doesn't make it any less sucky.
It's icky, man. I mean, like, they get to do that whole thing, like, we're listening and we're implementing stuff. And I think there is a fine line between that idea of listening to the fan base, looking at the community, looking at which things should have been in there, and then going, you know what, we can do that for you. Give us another few months, we'll develop it. Look at No Man's Sky and the fact it's still getting updates 8 years later, versus quality of life stuff, essential stuff, things that clearly should have been in there from the start, like biome variation, different settlement variation, mission design that doesn't rely on you walking for 20 minutes to then walk back again, which a vehicle would solve.
Jetpacking, Scott Till.
Jetpacking around the place. I feel like there is a distinction between that. And as Starfield is right now, it's still hard to recommend when you don't know exactly what's coming down the line or the way that it's being monetized. But let us know what you think down in the comments below of the state of Starfield, because it's kind of up in the air itself.